Well, that is definitely the funkiest music we've started this show with. In honor of Clint Kellum, who is the new director of the California Department of Cannabis Control. Clint, welcome. You got the big loud intro. I didn't know that was coming. It's great.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I guess I feel honored. Thank
I
you.
feel like I'm spinning a wheel every time, and like some music comes on, and that's how I sort of like it. It sets the tone that something special is going to happen. Jeremy, we're going to go to you first.
Sure, that was a great song, Jay. So I appreciate the kickoff. Clint, welcome to the show, first of all. Secondly, you've had a very wide-ranging career in California state government. You've sat across a number of different agencies over your career. Could you tell us a little bit about what attracted you to service in the state government in the first place and how you found your way to the Department of Cannabis Control?
Yeah. I mean, interestingly enough, I've been with the state of California for over 18 years now. Studied finance in school, worked for Morgan Stanley right out of school, and it was very sales oriented and just wasn't a fit for my sort of analytical preferences. And I fell into a state job in a budget office in the state prison department here in California. And it was a really natural fit for my skill set, my interest, and really where my heart was. I think what I learned at Morgan Stanley was sort of like there's, income opportunities, but if your heart's not in it, it's hard to sort of sustain. And I found over these past 18 years that across policy areas that I've worked on, I always find it kind of look back into like how my work affects the community, and I can really get behind that. And I worked heavily on public safety. There was a period of time when I was at the Department of Finance where I had 30 different state departments. So I had veteran affairs, banking, and that's where I got my first exposure to cannabis. And so those learning in those different spaces about the work, how it impacts people, is always really interesting. I'm a learner, problem solver at heart, and I think public service is a great opportunity to provide those skills. Cannabis in particular, I think is interesting, sort of, with the federal prohibition, how it was authorized by the voters here in California, the different complexities of that, and just being a new program that we're trying to mature as an industry brings a lot of complexity and a lot of different pieces to deal with, which I enjoy.
Yeah. So in your 18 years in state government, I imagine this might be the first experience where you've sort of had to build the plane, so to speak, as you fly it, right? Because the Department of Cannabis Control is still sort of a startup regulatory agency, although it's been a number of years. What is it like stepping into a role like that? While you're not the first director, you are one of the first, trying to do very hard things, very complex things.
Yeah, I think my training at the Department of Finance really prepared me well for that. I mean, oftentimes you're developing proposals sort of with limited information at a high pace, spanning a lot of different domains. And so we're doing the same thing here, right? In cannabis, I've got a full law enforcement team focused on the illicit market. I've got front end sort of application people, and then I've got laboratory services folks working on, cannabis science that's still sort of in its infancy. We don't have a federal agency that's supporting us on how to sort of build all of those. And I think where I always land on this is best information available, as much information as we can get, and then sort of see where it tips the scales in the right direction, and then continue to iterate. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to always make the right decision, but basically, like, let's be diligent with what we can, and then when we find out we maybe are misguided, let's adjust and try to improve.
Yeah. You were kind enough to give an interview with someone writing for us, Chris Kasakia, last week, as you came on. And this comes up a lot, not just in California, but in other markets where you are tasked with a whole array of things. And I don't know if you want to rank them, but like part of it is compliance, right? Making sure that cannabis businesses in California are compliant. Part of that is cracking down on the illicit market and the sort of infrastructure there. Part of it is sort of ongoing testing and regulatory compliance. And this is the other part, and creating a viable industry. I don't know if those are all sort of symbiotic, but that is where I think a lot of the industry is like, oh my goodness, it's so challenging to do business in California, New York, or other markets. Where in the line of all those things does compliance and sort of business success, sometimes those are loggerheads. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, first off, in my mind, there is no silver bullet. I think actually, in some ways, we're the way I like to think about it is we're a regulatory agency. We want to provide consumer, youth, environmental protection through our work. But when you only have 40% of your state's consumption coming from your regulated market, you have to look at that problem a little bit differently than an industry that's sort of, long-standing, only going through regulated channels. And so we have to do all our domains well. We have to be a standard regulatory agency doing that compliance work, because our value add to our consumers is really they get tested, safe products that they can trust, right? But it also means that we have to continue putting pressure on the illicit market with normal sort of enforcement mechanisms to help sort of tamp down the illicit operators and be able to support our legal system as well. I think there's a lot of consumer confusion in this space. And so we have work in relation to that in expanding retail access opportunities. Most consumers are used to getting things fairly easily, and it's not that easy in California's cannabis market. And so making that easier and more available. And then and you think about that in relation and you're sort of weighing all those, and then you look at what the operators need as well to be able to sustain. And we've done a few things, like last year, the legislature and the governor, there was a temporary tax increase from 19%. They reduced that back down to 15%. Mm-hmm. We avoided a 40% licensing fee increase by moving our illicit market costs and our track and trace system into the tax fund, which was an existing revenue source coming from the industry. We've got a few different regulations packages where we're trying to make those modifications. So we want to take those opportunities and make the changes. We don't want to compromise trust and safety. And so it's putting all of those things together, and it's kind of contextual to whatever individualized decision you're making.
Yeah. So when you spoke to Chris for our publication last week, I mean, I think you framed the problem pretty well. Legal cannabis, just 40% of California's cannabis sales come through legal channels. That's a pretty big problem, years into legalization. So, Clint, what are some of the ways that your office is approaching this problem, and where do you hope to be, by the end of the year or into next year?
Right. So, I mean, I think the thing that I like to sort of make sure I reframe for folks is that when I look at our regulated market, while imperfect, it does provide the consumer protection, youth safety, and environmental protection. And so thereby, by just focusing on trying to get more of California's consumption into that market, we're playing what a traditional regulator role would be. Mm-hmm. I'm not advocating in any way for increased consumption, but I think sometimes the way I say it could give that impression on that piece. But and then I think in response to like what we are doing, it was all the things I just mentioned. I mean, we have irons in the fire across all of those. So as it relates to like trusted and safe product, we have regulations out right now to increase the number of pesticides that we're testing for from 66 to 80 and sort of make modifications so that can't be gamed at the laboratory level. When I think about what we're doing to help reduce friction on operators, we just released a regulatory package that's in the public comment period that will allow for multi-pack products to be tested and then sold into the retail market. We're in development on group tagging instead of tagging each individual plant, creating some delineation in our track and trace system for operators to be able to do that. And then we are also looking at a combined activities license where there's a reduced friction for some vertical operation for different operating styles. So those are all sort of irons in the fire. We're restarting our Real California Cannabis campaign, which is a consumer awareness campaign to kind of reduce that friction or sort of confusion at the consumer level. And then we've got proposals in the budget to add more staff for our law enforcement team. The Board of State and Community Corrections is putting out $125 million for illicit market enforcement to local governments. It's prioritized for that, I should say. So there's irons in the fire across all those domains, and we're just trying. I think it's not one of those. It's kind of all of those in conjunction and steady effort on all of those will hopefully make progress.
One of the things that is certainly, it's not just unique to California, but I would say California is one of the places where it is most prominent, is that there are established, not illicit, but legacy growers, let's call them, right? That either wanted to join the regulated market or did not, but have gone back to sort of their the legacy sort of framework or frame or landscape. Like, is there, how much does that factor in that these are established growers, processors, manufacturers? Like, there's a whole distribution landscape or supply chain. Like, how do you go about both, I guess, on the sort of advocacy, cracking down on them, but also welcoming them back into the landscape? Like, how does that factor into sort of how you think about it? These are really, I'm using this term in like they're sticky, right? They're established growers. They have networks. They have places to sell their product. Like, how do you both crack down but also welcome them back, or is that even part of the conversation?
Well, I think California did do that early on, right? We're 8 years into our first legal sales. And so early periods of time were allowing people into licensure when not all the documentation was completed, including an environmental sort of requirement here in California called CEQA. And so that period actually, so there are they were at one point called temporary licenses and then provisional licenses. And that has functionally sunset except for equity retailers in that space. And so there's been an opportunity for folks to get on board and get up to speed. But, 8 years in, we do also have a mandate to provide consumer protection as well. And so there becomes a point where we need the industry to professionalize as well. And so we're taking those steps too, to making sure that we're doing both of those pieces in conjunction. We're not walking away from our education and collaboration, but there are pieces where a time has come and you need to be able to operate in a safe manner that our consumers can count on. As it relates to there are sort of different segments of, where people are in the legal spectrum. Where we see a lot of the work in the illicit market is actually just organized crime groups that have found, low risk, high reward, and it's just another line of business. And so that is really, given our limited enforcement funds, that is where we are focused in targets. Not to say that there's individualized actions that don't happen outside of that, but that is the priority when we look at the issue. There's also a lot of human harm, even beyond just cannabis per se, right? Labor trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, a host of other things that will be probably being financed by those funds that we want to shut down as well.
So, Clint, I want to ask you sort of a broader philosophical question. There's a lot of scrutiny on the California cannabis market, both because California is what it is culturally to cannabis, but also because it is a rather large economy that was early on in the states rolling out legal markets and legalization. Regulatory choices seem to flow downwards from policy goals, right? And so I want to sort of ask you to sort of understand, like, what do you view as the most important policy goal of legalization, if you had to pick one?
That's a great question. I don't know that it's been posed to me in exactly that way. It's interesting. I think there's probably a couple that come to my mind. There's the decriminalization element here for use. I worked in public safety a long time, and sort of criminalizing use and all of that doesn't really seem like it's beneficial to society in any useful way. Most people that become incarcerated or released, and sort of, as a society, we need a thoughtful way of dealing with that. And so I think there are benefits on that angle. And I think we've realized that piece of it. Now we've almost swung the other way, where we actually need to sort of be able to provide a consumer market that people can trust. Because I do think that was one element of this that people were expecting. And we haven't really delivered on that for various things that aren't fully within our control, and it was a voter approved initiative, and there are features of that have made that a little bit more difficult. I think we want Californians to know where they can access safe, trusted products and how to do that in a more straightforward way. I think there's probably a fair amount of consumers in California that are not accessing it clearly, and they may not even really realize that. You throw in the intoxicating hemp issue here and direct-to-consumer stuff. People are used to getting stuff in the mail. It's not apparent to them that they shouldn't be getting cannabis in the mail, and even the intoxicating hemp that's banned in the state, they shouldn't be doing that. So I think on those pieces, those are the two that stand out to me, of being able to have a credible consumer market that also does all the important things. Like, we want to protect youth, right? And in this, when it's more readily available, consumption does increase. And so we have to be thoughtful about, making sure there isn't youth access issues.
Clint, I want to zoom, I don't know, all the way out with eyes cast towards Washington, D.C. And certainly part of the broader conversation in cannabis is what is going to happen in D.C., especially around rescheduling. And I want to ask, like, how does that factor into sort of factor into your day-to-day work at the DCC? And or is there planning afoot, like if rescheduling happens, our world changes in these specific ways? Has that entered sort of the fray internally?
Not really. I mean, I'm hopeful for rescheduling to limit or get rid of the 280E restriction for our operators. I kind of just see that as a real important moment for them to kind of get onto level playing field with the rest of businesses in the United States. So I'm excited about that opportunity. I think it's so unclear on how it would roll out and sort of the impacts and who would be able to engage. I don't know that there's a lot to prepare for, because I think you might be shooting in the dark a little too much. And so ultimately, if it's sort of, medical grade cannabis that's ultimately allowed, there's probably a small number of, folks that will be engaged. And we'll support those opportunities, but I think it really is incumbent upon what ultimately comes down. And I think we'll wait for those opportunities, but really looking forward to the opportunity, hopefully for our operators, for the 280E restriction to end for them.
Be good cash flow enhancing opportunity, we'll say.
Yeah, I mean, it seems fair to sort of level that playing field with everybody else.
Yeah,
which I think we're trying to do across the spectrum, right? They don't have the same regular access to even small business technical assistance centers, because those are federally funded, that any other operator would be. And there's just generally still a little bit of that stigma that's around, and the banking piece, right? We've got a multitude of things where they're still operating in a really challenging environment.
We have a banker focused stream tomorrow, actually. So
okay.
Stay tuned for that. It's called Banker on Call. It's with our partners at Shield Compliance. Not to plug our next show, but thank you for the lead.
Great. I'll tune in.
So one, just trying to look at time here. One thing we hear from a lot of our California readers, many of them are operators in the state, and they were sort of disappointed, with the communication with the prior iteration of the DCC. They flag transparency issues and all of the above. I know you've been in the role now for less than 3 months, so obviously these things take time. But how much of this are you trying to fix, and how much time have you spent, in your first few weeks on the job, really trying to sort of repair that bridge and repair that trust?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, I think my predecessor, Nicole Elliott, did a tremendous job. When you look back to where we were 10 years ago, there was nothing, right? And there was no sort of infrastructure for any of that. And she, along with the staff, shepherded in creating its own department, statewide spread across the state, 9 different offices, hundreds of people out in the field. We have almost 600 people employed, and all of that just didn't exist.
600, wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of heads down work that has to happen internally on that front. And like just thinking about when you become a department and having to switch over, just making sure people get their paychecks. I know people will their minds will be blown, like that seems so straightforward, but within a constrained environment like government, it's quite challenging. It's also not done very frequently, so there's not a great playbook on all of that. So they lived through, they worked, they did all of those things. I think they were being transparent in the way government is and can be. We have been pushing more to sort of get out of our shell a little bit over the last few months. But there, the line sort of never ends. We provide one level of transparency. The next, question comes to share more information out. And we're sort of maintaining, pieces to deliberate on. We're also maintaining investigative files. And there's all sorts of other reasons why we would maybe not share all the pieces on those on that information. But yeah, we're really trying to open the aperture on communication in general. I say this a lot, so sorry for folks that have listened to these before, but generally, basically, people, when they don't have all the story, will fill in the narrative in their own minds the way they want. And it's not always usually in the best light when they fill that in. And so we're just trying to sit down at the table, not to say we're going to solve everything, but to just share our thinking on stuff and where we sit. And we're hoping that in itself will create a bridge to say, we're people too. We care about this work. We want it to happen. It may not happen exactly like you are, but we're having to hold sort of different priorities and different thoughts as well. And sort of just being able to share those across the line.
I think, Jared, I think we're coming up on time. That's a really good place to sort of wrap it. We appreciate the transparency as much as we had a story about you, an interview with you last week, and we have you on our stream this week. So we appreciate the time on both those fronts. We look forward to connecting with you again. And we appreciate the time.